I think kind of where I want to start with is doing the other half, right? Let's talk about resources. It's hard to accept, like, you go through your whole life and you're functioning, I'm putting quotes around that, right? And then you hit points in life that life slows down. There's a transition that slows you down. So for us, it's getting out of the military. For you, it was leaving the hospital, right?
Yeah.
And those moments give us time, which we all want more of. And then we're like, oh crap. Then we start thinking
Right.
more. And
Right.
so it's at that, what I notice, it's at that point in time, what are we going to do with that info? Because I've seen all kinds of things. I have a family member that completely had a breakdown, and
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the family is like, oh my god, she's being so dramatic, and she's not any better, and she's insomniac, and it was just one thing after another until I find out through her. She told me directly at 50, when she had the breakdown, it was from massive childhood trauma, and I mean like stories that would horrify people. And
Mm-hmm.
I went, oh my God, her perfect little world, her perfect house, her perfect children, her perfect life. I mean, everything was perfect. It looked like a Norman Rockwell picture,
Right.
that that was her trying to hold it all in, and she couldn't. And then it came out at a transition point in her life.
Yeah.
50, kids are all grown, you're now finding yourself again. Like, I'm going through that, like, ooh, what am I doing?
It's
My
almost,
kids are getting older,
yeah, like a bit of an identity crisis.
yeah, you have that identity crisis, and then you start
Right.
reflecting, and then you're a little wiser, and then you're like, oh shit. And at that point, what are we doing, right? So I think now is a time that you have come on before and talked to us and said, hey, we've got all, this is how we get there, through various roads but very similar environments, and this is how we get there. Now what do we do about it?
Right. I think that's what we're not doing a good job of, even in the first responder healthcare community, and military as well, is that transition period of we're no longer running and gunning or boots on the ground.
Yeah.
We have to transition with age, with ability, with physical ability. We have that transition period, and mentally we are not prepared for that. So
Right.
that's one thing that we're not doing very well, especially I know in the first responder community, when we're no longer physically able to do all the things that our job entails. So we move into positions that are less physically demanding, and then people have that mental, like you said, that's when it slows down, and that's when they start processing things. And I think that becomes a really hard period, and we're not addressing that. I think we're so focused on warm bodies
Yes.
to with the healthcare crisis, with the shortage that we have in law enforcement. We're just focused on getting young warm bodies into these positions, and we are not focusing on anything downstream, and that's something we definitely need to be better at. I kind of think that we it needs to be changed how the programs, and I know federal law enforcement does some programs when they're in the academy as far as mental health and taking care of themselves. My son just started medical school, and they did a big presentation on them as far as mental health and self-care. But it's a couple hour lecture. it's
Yeah.
it's telling it to kids who truly have no idea what they're in for. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to stick this in here so that we check mark a box, but we're not really providing any services or any resources. We're just telling you, hey, this is going to be an issue eventually. you
Yeah.
know um, I don't know that we're doing like any actual programs to support them throughout their career.
Yeah, I think both military and private side alike are so mission focused on getting whatever the task
Mhm.
at hand is done, that we fail to acknowledge that a lot of times. Or if we do, it's just kind of a quick, "Hey, it exists, and maybe or maybe not. You'll deal with it later," and kind of dismiss. And I mean, on top of that too, there's I think a lot of reasons why people don't go and get the care, and we kind of touched on that in the last episode, but the whole being embarrassed bit. People are embarrassed to go and get help, raise their hand and say, I'm not doing okay. I've seen other situations where people proactively, recognize that they're a little bit off the mark and not functioning too well, and it ends up backfiring. And before they know it, they're kind of the village pariah. There's a whole lot of reasons that people wind up saying no and not wanting to get care, failing to see that long-term goal of, okay, if I instead say yes, none of these other things matter.
Yeah. And one thing that I have taken part in that was extremely beneficial, critical incident debriefing. And I'm sure that, you guys are used to that on the military side, but it's not widely accepted. First responders is where we're seeing it. Healthcare, I've never seen it implemented. But I was in a situation a few years ago, and a local police officer was shot, and we brought in the medics that worked on her following the incident. And when I watched them walk in, physically, you could just see the guilt. What if I'd done this? Could I have done this differently? And these were young men. They look like kids to me because, of course, I'm a mother of 20-year-olds. So they all look like kids to me. And, we sat them in a circle. We went through, got them talking. Hey, you did exactly what your training told you to do. You handled the incident as professionally as you could. And as we went through that process, I could see them physically change. I saw them relax. I saw them it was kind of like just a physical sigh. And my brain just started spinning. And I thought, if this critical incident debriefing hadn't taken place, those young men would have carried that for the rest of their lives. They would have thought, if I'd have done this differently, if I'd have done this, or maybe this person would have survived if we had got in there sooner. And that right there just justified that it needs to be standard protocol with these incidents. Because studies have shown that the brain is less likely to turn an event into a PTSD episode later if we do process those things as quickly as possible after the actual initial occurrence. So just by taking an hour, sitting down, talking these guys through this situation, it possibly could have saved them, a lifetime of issues. And I don't understand why that isn't, widely accepted, why that isn't just protocol. Why is that not protocol for everyone?
So I just want to take a minute here and introduce our guests, because we always have good conversation and we always jump right in. So Leslie Yancy is back with us again. Thank you, Leslie, for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I love it. We talked so much the last time, and the podcast was awesome. I listened to it, and I still learned stuff listening to it. And so we all agreed we had to do a part 2, because we went through how we get to these points as medicine, in being in the military, medical, and just medical in general. And you made a major point in the last podcast. Sometimes in childhood, we actually become primed for that. If we were in rough childhoods, or if we were in abusive situations, or just something traumatic happened to us, it can prime us to get into these more adrenaline-filled jobs, right?
Yes.
And so we went through all that, but what we didn't have time for was to talk about, like, okay, so we're here, and we realized that we are maybe not adapting in the most optimal way. I don't want to use the word broken, because I don't really think we're broken. I think we've just learned to adapt in ways to allow us to survive in the most optimal way, right? And so we talked all about that, but we really haven't talked about the resources that are available. And that's what you were just touching on, is that we have like crisis action teams. And I will say that, yes, we probably do it more in the military, but I don't think it's that good in the military either.
Okay.
And so, for example, when I was stationed overseas, I had a situation where I was in a leadership position there, and we had a technician get in a car accident, a severe
Mhm.
car accident. She, a week later, passed away. And the the person in charge of that area was actually on vacation. So they called me and they're like, hey, this person had an accident. It is not looking good. We're bringing her family out. I had just come back from vacation. I was like, oh my Lord. So I come back, the person in the leadership position comes back, and she's not really making great choices. So we have a person that's at some schooling there at the base, but still not on our unit. She's there at her school. They tell her what's going on. She emotionally falls apart, and she's like, I need to go to see my boyfriend that's an hour away, right? And I'm like, that's not a good idea right now. It was actually more than an hour, and
Right.
it's in a city, and you're emotionally charged. I'm like, we need to bring everybody together, and we need
Yeah.
to get them debriefed, and we need to talk through it. And
Yeah.
and we got a lot of people, but the person in that position let her go, and it cost her her job. They removed her from position because of that. What I saw in this specific scenario is that this was a person that, she was unique. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but once I understood everything going on and explained her, but she was kind of mature for her age, but immature in other ways. And she was early 20s. So
Mhm.
that kind of, I'm a grown up, but I'm still a kid. Kind
Right.
of. And so
Yeah.
she kind of didn't get along with everybody. Not that they hated her, but they didn't all really jive with her. And then we found out later that she was trying to adopt her sister to get her out of a really bad situation.
Oh, wow.
And that explained to me I'm
Yeah.
trying to become mature, but I'm still at this age. And I was like, wow, that clarified everything for me. But a lot of people, when that happened, they were like, well, I had an argument with her the day before, or I mean, I didn't really know her. And the same thing, you could see that guilt and
Yeah.
that well, guilt for lack of any other description. And so we were able to help process some of that. We did bring in a team, a mental health team, to do that. But if you scroll ahead years from then, another scenario happens. A friend of mine ends up in a car accident, passes away. This was a very well loved person, and
Mhm.
very well respected. And I was trying to do the same thing, like, where are they? And I kept begging the chaplains, like, could you come in and just walk around? You have to build trust
Right.
before they're going to open up. And,
Yes.
oh, yeah, but, I'm really not assigned here. I have to go do this. And, oh, I'm leaving that. And in my head, I'm all like, I don't give a fuck where you're going or what you're doing. Get me
Right.
somebody here now.
Yeah.
There's a need.
Yeah.
Yeah, it overrode everything in my book, and their sense of urgency was not there, and it
So,
took a toll on that team.
yeah, so I had a similar experience with I talked on the first podcast about a coworker that died traumatically. And one thing that I always express when I do public speaking is you don't plan for an emergency during an emergency. You
Right.
already have plans in place. Because when you look at the size of, your roster, statistically, you know, tragedy is going to happen. It's not if, it's when, because you're dealing with, like we had a staff size of 55 just in our department, and there was nothing in place. So I always really stress that if you are a manager, or that is your role, you are the gatekeeper for when this tragedy occurs, and you need to know what resources are available for your employees. So
Exactly.
the same thing happened. We had the hospital they had someone on staff to help, and it's not that this person they weren't trained in this. in particular, they came up, asked if anyone wanted to talk, kind of the same thing that you saw. We didn't work with this person, pretty much, hey, if you want to talk, I'm available. Well, of course, none of us, we're all hard asses. We're like, why do I want to talk to you?
We got
Like,
this.
yeah, and we had nothing, there was no common grounds between us and this individual. So there was it didn't feel like a safe space at all to go in and talk. And then that was when, like on the first podcast I mentioned, we were just all in a downward spiral. And looking back, I can see that. But at the time, we were just in survival mode.
Right.
So yeah, so that's one thing that I really stress now is that if you're management, you need to know what resources are available when that emergency happens,
so that they can properly manage the crisis when it's
yes,
there, not try to figure that out as it unfolds. Totally. What's that phrase?
Yes.
Prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance.
I can't say
Yes,
that, but you're right.
Know what the hell you're doing going into it, and have a plan
right,
when shit hits the fan. Absolutely.
right,
And that,
exactly.
I think one thing, so that when I was leaving the military, I was on some various working groups, and one of them, and it started, so in the military, we have the subcultures, right? And so we have special forces, and the more subculture you get, the more mentally taxing it is, right? And so we were all talking, and they said one of the things that they were doing was they were starting to put, well, not starting because they'd been going on for a while, but they were continuing to put therapists and psychologists and whatnot embedded with these units. And it's a very, very smart idea. Why? Because you're building trust. And those subcultures, they are putting literally their life in somebody else's hands, and vice versa when they're getting out there and doing stuff. So then you come back and maybe you had a rough deployment, it messed you up a little bit, you need to process it. Do you really think you're going to be comfortable going across base to the Joe Schmo who you've never met therapist and go, yeah, dude, so like this kid got killed and there was so much fire, I'm not sure if I'm the one that did it or not, right? I mean, really? You're going to go say that to someone you don't know? Doubt it. No, there's no rapport. So why aren't we doing this in the hospitals themselves, even on the military side? We had at one of my bases, we had a mental health unit. It was just a very acute, 3-day kind of thing. And I actually were friends with some of them. They'd come down and chat and whatnot. Why don't we have them for the hospital? Why aren't they coming down and making friends and learning about people and just being the pulse of the hospital? Or the clinic,
absolutely,
or the whatever.
And we saw, we would have one member of pastoral care for, that was on call, and you have one person. So of course he's dealing primarily with families, families that are end of life, or traumas that have came in. They were great. They were great for that. And we were so appreciative that they were there to help with those families when those traumas rolled in. But as far as support for the staff, that was not that was not what they did. That was just their responsibility.
When our big incident happened, when we had the car accident and we lost one of our coworkers, I will tell you that there was somebody that was not in our office, but was right next to our office and was in a different section, but we worked with them all the time. And her office happened to be a walkthrough. It was really weird, but you would walk from one hallway to the other, like through her office. And she was actually an LPC, and by trade. That's not the job she was doing, but that's a trade. And I know a number of us, and I was one of them. I would walk in there and close the door and just sit. And she'd just look at me like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "I just need a breath." Nope. Yeah. I'm like, I can't breathe right now. And she's like, this is, and she would just say, this is a safe place and you
Yeah.
can sit. And she didn't necessarily say anything all the time. Sometimes she did, but she was in that mix too, because she knew the person. And so, but I'll tell you, that was the Band-Aid I needed to be able to keep going, to do all the stuff that I needed to do. But I would just sit, and then sometimes I just cry.
Yes.
Sort of. It was more like a tear shed, and then like, suck it up. You got things to do,
Yeah, that
Right.
is so much more helpful than how many times have you been in a situation where you're not doing too well or need some help, and somebody, maybe a boss that's uninvested, well, let me know if you need anything. Let me know
Oh,
if you need
yeah.
anything. Like, yeah, who's gonna take you up on that offer if it's just checking a
Exactly.
box? It's not helpful,
Yes.
and it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Let me know if you need
Yeah.
something. Yeah, cool, thanks.
And I feel like on the healthcare side, I actually had a chief financial officer of a hospital. He kind of went toe to toe with me, and he said, "Well, Leslie, if this is true, if this is so mentally harmful on healthcare workers, where's the statistics? Show me the statistics." And I said, "Well, let me tell you something." I said, "If I show you the statistics, what are you going to have to do?" And he knew that then that would be a financial cost, because then we're going to have to do something about it. I said, no one is going to support these studies, because once they come out, then these healthcare systems are going to have to do something about it. So that's never going to be allowed. That's never going to be a study that's supported at these learning institutions. I don't feel like it's ever going to be something that is documented. The only research that I have found was a study that tied ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages to people in nursing professions. So I did find that study, and that it was there was a much higher risk of ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages to people that were in the nursing profession.
Had both.
So yeah. So, and like cortisol levels, things like that are not something that's normally checked. That's not, a normal blood draw. Normally that's an out of pocket cost if you were to have those numbers checked. So, and I, like I said, I held my own and said, look, nobody's going to support this, because then you're going to have to do something about it. You're going to have to improve that work environment. And we're more worried about finding warm bodies than we are, preserving them down the road.
I love the idea that you had earlier, though, about the debriefs after a situation occurs, because kind of going back to the numbers, if we could embed that within our hospital systems and do that early intervention, sit, process, and talk it through, how much money would that save the organization or whomever years down the line when they're having to go inpatient once, twice, three times, who knows, versus an hour-long processing session. You know what I mean?
It's the same argument we have in the military. Matter of fact, I one of the arguments I would have in some of our meetings, I was usually never the popular comment maker. And so one time I made the comment, I said, if Congress really knew how much it costs to take care of the military appropriately, they would choke. But they don't know, because the military all the way up through fudges these numbers. That you can make statistics say anything, and they're real, and I've seen it firsthand. And they're like adjusting numbers just to slant the approach, not to make it seem so harsh. I'm like, yeah, you kind of can't do that. You need to just let the numbers speak for themselves, and then we decide what we're doing about that. But nobody wants to do that for the exact same reason that you just said. Then they have to put the dollars to it. And the military's dollars go to the fighter planes, the ships, the tanks, the people fighting the battle. It doesn't go towards getting them better. If they're that broke, then and I say broke because that's how they'll look at it. If they're that broke, then they need to get out. Done. Right? That's their solution. We'll put big Band-Aids on that arterial bleed, and suck it up as much as you can. And when that doesn't work anymore, we have this nice thing called a medical board for you, and we will send you on your way and let the VA have you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
They don't want to address the elephant in the room. It's much easier to just sweep it under
No,
the rug and
We're not set
keep
up,
it moving.
we're not set up that way. That by design, the military, if I give them any little defense on it, we are assets. As harsh as that sounds, we are not walking into a kumbaya circle. We all know that. We are walking in as an asset with a skill that we need to do stuff. And for the medical community in the military, it's a very stressful one. We've got to keep our war fighters war fighting, right?
yes.
We don't take care of ourselves. We've got to get them to the front line.
Yes.
We've got to make them well. So by design, we are not set up that way, and they don't want to be that way.
I don't think we do a great job of taking care of one another either.
No.
Oh no, we eat our young.
Oh my God, that's like a whole other podcast on eating your young. We could do a series with you at this point.
Yes, 100%. But on the flip side of that, though, no one goes into the military. No one goes in as a first responder. No one goes into healthcare. And I hope no one goes in and expects it to be an easy job.
Right.
So there has to be, some self responsibility to say, I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself. I can't expect everyone else to fix me, or I can't expect to have resources available and never use them and then expect to be better, because I also see that a lot. I work with people all the time, and I'm like, we come up with a game plan. Hey, this is what we're going to do. We're make sure that we in order to stop the sleep disturbances and things, we're going to have a process, and and then they just don't do it. They don't. People have to help themselves.
Yeah.
And we have a huge lack of accountability in these populations as well. So it's kind of like we got to address that as well, that if the resources are there and we're giving you the resources, please take advantage of that. Use that and make yourself better. Don't just say, well, the military ruined me and there's nothing I can do about it.
Nah, exactly. I mean, and I think I'll add on to what you just said was, if you have to help yourself,
Yes.
before you can't help yourself, because
Right.
that's
Absolutely.
really what ends up happening is like, then they get to a point. So in one of the programs we used to run in the military was taking care of all the Guard and Reserve when they got injured, to get them back on orders or keep them on orders, and then either A, get them healed up and back to their job, or B, through a medical board, right? And a lot of times when I would see like a special forces person coming across, I'm like, oh, they're more times than not, they're going to be an MEB. They don't know it yet, but they're going to be. Why? Because they are holding out so long, and they will do whatever. Like I had a pilot that had a horrible back. I mean, like horrendous back. And he really needed to be MEB'd. And his guard unit was like, no, we can do this with you and that with you. And I'm like, hey, listen, when you're all done, they're not coming to your door on Sundays bringing you dinner. Like, no. Seriously, what are you doing here? And I said, have you had any treatment or anything? Well, come to find out, when he was deployed, one of the docs there did radio frequency ablation on him so he could manage. And, I tell him, I said, hey, that's great. Is it documented? Nope. Because it's one of the embedded doctors and they're just trying to keep them going. And I said, the other thing to think about, I said, is that the only thing RFA does is block the message coming through.
Right.
The place is still injured. So now you are at a higher risk of hurting yourself even more, because you don't feel pain.
Yes.
I said, so you're going to get that RFA and go sit in the seat that's causing all the compression and all the issues. And now that you can't feel it, I said, you know what you're going to be like in another couple of years? I said,
Yeah.
where do you want me to mail the walker to?
Yes.
And he was like,
And,
and
and that probably goes back to us only identifying as our professions.
right.
You
Oh,
know,
yes.
that's all he was concerned about was
Yeah. I'm a
staying
pilot.
in and yes, being a pilot.
And we're trained. We're not trained. There's no I in this, even though military spelt with an I, there's really no I in there, right? It's a team.
Right.
And so if you are not able to do something, you're letting your team down. And
Yeah.
you tell me, MZ, how much guilt does that come with?
Oh my gosh, can't tell you how many times you see people get injured or sick and reach out for care, do what they need to do so that they can stay in the fight, and they get shit for it. All of a sudden, man, you should be here at work, you shouldn't be at appointments, and
Right.
getting the raw end of that deal, and they're made to feel like they're doing something bad by trying to get better.
You're milking the system.
Yeah. Or you're being a baby about this, suck it up, you'll be fine, do it later, do it on your time. And before too long, especially with the mental health cases, they end up becoming problem children.
Yes. Yes. And on the healthcare side, there's such a shortage, always a shortage. And it all comes down to budget. And so the same thing is if I call off because I am truly ill and unable to perform my job, then yes, you feel guilty because you let everyone down. When the way that we should be thinking is it's not our fault that they do not have appropriate coverage. That doesn't
Right.
fall on us, but we absorb that. Like there should never be a time where they go short because I'm not working. There should be someone else to step in and fulfill that role. And that doesn't fall on us. That falls on management. That falls on the person that is setting the budget for staffing. That falls on them. But we absorb all that.
And we don't set,
it's the same
yeah,
thing.
and we don't set up that way. And I mean, in the military, you don't hardly get an overlap. I mean, I remember when I was a nurse manager and I had people that needed, they were PCSing, they were moving to a new base, and the other person coming in was going to be like 3 weeks after them. And I have to figure out, well, it's not just 3 weeks because they got to come in, they have to get housed, they got to get set up, they got to get oriented. It's like a month, right? And
Right.
so, or more sometimes. And so I have to figure out, well, let's see, that's like a month or so before they're fully up and running, depending on what level they are. And many times I was the one covering the shifts. And at the time I was nurse manager and I have to cover shifts and I have to be the nurse manager. And then I would get crap on both sides. Oh, well, you didn't do your nurse manager, whatever report. Okay, sorry. And, oh, why aren't you covering? There's nobody to cover this shift. Can you cover it? Yep, sure enough, there is nobody else at this point, or I don't have
So
call people.
you're rushing people into positions when they're not ready.
Yeah, and that's way more dangerous.
Yes.
I mean, and that's very, very scary. And I was very good about orientation. We even went so far. So overseas, there's a little, I don't know if this still exists, but at the time, there's Red Cross volunteers. And what people don't realize, like all kinds of volunteers, and some of them are nurses. And the way it worked over there was you could not use them as a primary nurse because they were 100% volunteer. And so all you could do was use them to enhance, your schedule or to plus it up a little. But I had 2 nurses that one we got rid of because she lied. She didn't even have her BLS. And she was no kidding you.
Did you stay at a Holiday Inn once?
No, she was trying to get in because she was pregnant. She was a nurse, but she was new and didn't have her BLS yet. She was pregnant and she wanted to get on our floor to get to know the staff. So she had somebody to deliver that she knew.
That's convenient.
So lying about your BLS is good. And then somebody else who got ended up moving. But finally the third person came, and I digress a little bit, but she came in and was solid as a rock. And we're short. 3 nurses were short.
Right.
And I'm like, okay. And this person was rock solid and told me, she goes, listen, my husband's over here. He's a doc. He was a doc in the building. I am bored out of my mind. They didn't have kids at the time. Let
Yeah.
me do more. And I was like, I'm limited by this or that. So I went to the chief nurse. I'm like, listen, here's my thought. And she goes, I hear nothing. And she turned her head for me. And I used her as a full-time staff, and I would only use her no more than 2 times a week, ask her for the third on occasion, but I was super conscious of it. But she
Right.
wasn't a person that would shirk anything, so I could trust her. But
Right.
that's a luxury, right? And I broke a lot of rules to do that. But in the real world, what do you do when you're short? You're caught
Right.
between staff,
Yeah.
mental wellness, and patients that could potentially become more injured or hurt or even worse if there's not enough staff there, if they're not receiving the care.
Yep.
Quality versus
Yep.
quantity.
Where is the solution, right? So I think, well, I'll ask you this. Where do you see the solutions?
So I think that it's going to take a lot of people with just a personal initiative to get these things rolling, because it's kind of like a catch-22 as far as if you're in a management role like you were. I think people are going to have to take this up on themselves to say, hey, this is the resources we have available. This is what we're looking at. It's almost like management is in a hard spot to establish those things. So I kind of encourage people that, hey, if this is something that you feel strongly about, I mean, it's pretty much people are just going to have to rise up and start establishing this themselves. I mean, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know how. I don't think that anything will be universally accepted. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type thing. I don't know what the answer is, but it definitely isn't working the way that it's going now.
What do you do when you get a client, like a one-on-one client that's like, help? Like what on the micro level, what do you offer them that way?
So when I get a client in, we do an initial intake. We start kind of like discussing how their mental health is currently affecting just their overall life, so that we can kind of hone in what our major focuses need to be. Like I mentioned sleep earlier. Of course, if we have sleep disturbances, that just throws everything into a spiral. So I initially start off with a lot of education. And the reason I do the education is just everyone kind of comes to me with the overall thought that I shouldn't be having these problems. So, when you start throwing in the education and you say, hey, look, this is actually out of your control. If you've been exposed to these traumatic events, the body and brain actually can't process these. It's just, it is how the body works. It's not made to process these types of events. So, so that's normally how we start. I start looking for resources in their area. I'm also a peer support with a group that I work with them while they are finding a good placement for them, as far as, with a psychiatrist or a licensed therapist. So sometimes I bridge the gap between getting them established with someone, because sometimes that wait is so long.
We just triggered a thought. We know that when we're treating PTSD, you kind of have to do it from a multimodality approach, meds, therapy, usually psychiatrist is in the mix too. As far as being a trauma recovery coach, what's the difference between going that route versus therapy, or is it better worked with both?
I think it's better worked with both. I think that they're comfortable with a coach, especially one with like the trauma informed background. Because again, we talked about just any therapist isn't going to be a good fit. You have to find the one that is a good fit. And sometimes that's a lengthy process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
so there's actually several programs. There's several groups that I know that work with first responders and healthcare workers and get, not only make sure that their insurance is accepted, they visit these locations. If, say, it's a, you know, a retreat type therapy where they go somewhere for a weekend, a week, a couple weeks, they visit those locations to make sure that it's a good fit for that first responder. You know, we don't want our police officers going into a clinic where people that they may have had run-ins with in the community are at. So lots of times they try to get those outside of their general area. So I think it works well because we kind of fill in gaps. I also set up like plans. Like I said, we start discussing what their problems are, and it's kind of like I help them kind of line out their you know, their mode of attack. Like, what is the most pressing issue? Then what's the next? And then what is the outcome? What is my expected outcome of this? So it's kind of like they work through the issues. I just kind of guide them and give them goals every week. And then, you know, but unfortunately, what I see a lot is people are really working and they're doing well, and then they fall off. And then a couple months later, they'll cycle back around. It's like the minute they start feeling a little bit better, they stop working on themselves. And that's just something, it's a constant process. You constantly, because most of us are still in environments where we're adding on. So, you know, I always say, you know, 20 years in the woods, it's going to take us a long time to get back out because we've went that deep. So we've got to come back out. So definitely, you know, getting with someone that is continually checking up on you, keeping you, you know, accountable. That's kind of what I feel like my job is, or my role is keeping them accountable for continuing that work on themselves.
So consistency is key, is what I'm hearing. It's kind of like the gym. You can't go once or twice a month and expect to get thin and sexy all of a sudden. You've got to keep at it on a very regular basis to have any kind of success.
Well, and you know, we didn't get to this point overnight. And it's funny because I do acupuncture and I love acupuncture. And I've been dealing with a knee for better part of a year. I can only get so far and the knee will start shooting pain. I have no point of injury. It just started hurting one day. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on? And I'm sure age has nothing to do with it. So don't even say it easy. Shut up.
What? Hey, I would fully own. You might have a couple years on me, but you're still running circles.
Yeah, maybe on the computer. I was like, oh, and it kind of hindered my life a little bit because I like to go out for a run. I like to lift weights and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Well, anyway, I went to my acupuncture, and the first time I went to her, which is like months and months and months ago, she checks your pulse and she looks at your tongue. Not kidding you, two things. And she looks at me and says, "This is going to be a long road." And I'm like, "Gee, thanks." And she goes, "Well, you didn't get here overnight. And so it's going to take a while." And that's all she said. And then months later, I asked her, like, you know, where am I at and how does this look? And she said, "I have to build your energy in order for your body to heal itself." And boy, that one hit me hard. I was like, damn, I depleted myself so bad of myself that I've got to find myself and get enough of myself back in there to be able to actually heal myself. And I'll be damned, I had acupuncture just before I came over here. And I had the session before, I was telling her about my knee, and she did acupuncture on it. And I was showing my husband I could squat down. It's a little niggly, but I don't have that sharp pain anymore. And so she did it again this time. And I have been going to her for, I don't know, 6 months every other week, 6 or 8 months that I've been going to her. And slowly but surely, it's getting better. No medication is involved, but my body is starting to heal itself. And I've been out of the military for, I'm going on 3 years. And it's taken all that time in different phases, different levels, different capacities for my body to finally start coming back together.
Hence,
Yeah.
Detox. That's right. That's what my name is.
Right. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize, that when we live on that sympathetic nervous system and it's constantly going, we become very immunosuppressed.
Oh, yeah.
And so you find, so many people, like you said, autoimmune diseases, inflammation, different, they run rampant. And then we're like, oh gosh, why am I sick all the time? Why am I, having all these issues? And it's literally because of stress. It's because we're not taking care of ourselves. And to your point, I have had to be very purposeful in learning to listen to my body. And, and like the intrusive thoughts, nightmares, things like that, they go away. And the minute I start getting stressed, overwhelmed, exhausted, that's when they start finding their way back. And now, instead of, maybe taking some sleeping pills, or, some people may drink different things like that, that is a big red flag. Leslie, you're not taking care of yourself. You need to get yourself under control, because, we can't function without sleep. So I think we have to learn to be very in tune with our bodies. And I don't think that Western medicine is very good at teaching us or telling us or explaining that to us. Or no training. And I think a lot of people, like if you were to mention acupuncture, they'd be like, oh, voodoo, like this isn't normal. Give me a pill. Like everyone wants a pill for something. And our bodies will communicate with us if we learn to listen to what it has to say. So, that's definitely something that is part of this journey, is learning to listen into our bodies and deciding when enough is enough.
Amen. I think our bodies will support us for a little while. You can compartmentalize and ignore, sit in denial for a little bit, but eventually the body's going to tell us outwardly that there's something wrong and we need to address it. Either the weight gain or loss. People deal with IBS. I've heard of people developing styes on their eye.
Hives. Even coming out with hives.
Yes.
There's 90%
of our serotonin is produced in our gut.
Yeah.
Look at
who takes a probiotic daily? I mean, I give my kids, I take one daily and I give it to them. Why? Because exactly. The gut, they call it, was it the third brain is the gut?
The brain.
The guy is probably different, but I'm just saying overall that. But to your point on, like, we don't treat root cause. Western medicine is not built to treat root cause unless they see it immediately. Like, oh, I saw the car run over your leg. You probably have a broken leg. Well, great. We got you there. But like, for example, I'll use myself. I went to the doctor. I feel like ass. As I'm coming out of the military, I get diagnosed with fibro. That's super awesome. Fortunately, it's pretty mild on the scale, so to speak. Still sucks though. And my joints are achy, all that stuff. And I ask my doctor for labs, she's a nurse practitioner, and she draws my labs. My vitamin D is 26.
Yeah.
Do you know what was told to me? I shit you not. You need to take 1,000 to 2,000 units of vitamin D the rest of your life. That's it. No redraw, no recheck. And I'm like, that's not going to build me up, right? So I called my girlfriend, who's a women's health nurse practitioner, retired. And I said, I'm pulling you out of retirement for a minute. Listen, here's my issue. And she's like, 50,000 for 12 weeks, recheck at the end of 12 weeks and adjust. I'm like, okay, I did. And I had to go I told her that I was doing some research and I saw this and I wanted to try it. I didn't want to be rude and tell her I went to someone else. And so I did. And within 2 weeks, my joint pain alleviated. I was awake. I didn't have that fog, that heaviness feeling. And so at the end of 12 weeks, we redrew it. And I'm going to tell you just for context, the extreme end of it, if you're creeping at 100, you got to kind of start watching it. 125 to 150, you're probably way in overload and you got to back down, right? Mine was 53.
And you already felt better.
And it barely doubled. Yeah. So I stay on 5,000. I don't,
Yes.
I just manage myself because I'm a nurse and we're just stupid like that. We just do our own thing. And so I was like, this works better. And sure enough, I got off for 1 week. We went out in the RV and I'm like, I'm not going to bring all that stuff. And I came home and paid for it for 2 weeks. I was so
Yes.
sore. My husband's like, don't you ever come off that vitamin D again.
Yeah,
Taking away from that is the power of self-advocating, because had you have not
absolutely.
questioned that and gotten the second opinion and just took the advice of, okay, 2,000 units for the rest of your life, and said, okay, what about your married business? You wouldn't have gotten to this point.
No, and I mean, I'm just lucky that I had knowledge because I am a nurse. And so I already knew enough to be dangerous, so to speak. And I was like, that's crap. 1,000 to 2,000 unit isn't even going to get me up.
And I think, you know, like you said, being an advocate, it's not a cookie cutter treatment for anybody. It's everybody's journey is individual to them. So, you know, if you may have to go rogue and find out what works for you, it may not work for everybody, but finding out what works for you and then being purposeful in doing that
And consistent,
doing that.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
You can't go once. I saw a show and they were doing alternative medicine and they went to China and they had acupuncture, one. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's a little better, but it didn't really work. Come on. You've
Right.
got to give time. And we are not built in a society that gives time.
No.
Consistency.
So
Yes.
so for the sake of time, because I'm looking like we're probably pushing close to that hour there, these are the things that I hear in our conversation. I hear consistency, advocacy, be willing to find out what works for you.
Yes.
You trial and error. And I know nobody wants to hear that. They're just like, oh my God. And I'm like, I get it. When you're so down and out and you go to somebody and you think, please fix me, and they don't, it's exhausting to think, oh my God, I got to go through this again. But there is someone there. There is going to be a match. It just takes time. And you will energetically know this is working for me. And it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing, you know?
Right.
Everything doesn't work for everybody. It's okay.
Yeah.
But I think we don't, and giving space, we don't do that in the medical community. There's no space because we're short. The community doesn't have enough people. And when that person goes away, then the person that's already stressed out is now picking up more.
Yes.
And so now they start to become resentful because they're like, freaking Sarah can't hold her own shit,
Right.
suck it up now. And now I got to pick up her crap and I'm already at my max and I'm drinking at home.
Right.
So if enough of us, this is, you know, the world according to Detox, whatever that's worth. If enough of us set boundaries and say, we're not doing this.
Right.
There's going to be a change, because guess what? When the medical community doesn't have medical people, they're going to have to figure out something else. And I seen it in the military. This new generation of troops that are coming in, they demand more. They're not taking the bullshit. They are more about like, yeah, I'm going to go take my leave. I'm not building up 100 days and think I'm a rock star.
And don't think you're going to call me while I'm on that leave.
Right. And I'm not picking my phone up when I'm on leave. Like, they're demanding better. And the military is now scrambling to figure it out because recruiting is in the tank. I just read something where it was like, I don't know if it was a study or just a poll, and they were asking retired veterans, would you tell your children or your friends' children or grandchildren to join the military? And we're hearing over and over, no, we're ending legacies.
Right.
That's pretty bad. We're ending legacies. And I have friends that their kids are, you know, becoming nurses. And I'm like, you know, I look at them and go, yay. And then in the back of my head, I'm like, God, good luck.
Get your helmet on.
Yeah. Here's your crash pad, you know,
Right.
because it's scary. Yeah, I tell all my friends, I'm like, don't get sick. You don't want to be in the hospital right now. You really don't.
Right. Right.
It's a rough time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always say that too when I do public speaking. We would wear, a lot of the oldie goldies would wear these badges of, oh, we've got 300 sick hours saved up, and oh, I've got a gold star. And it's like, nobody cares. Like,
As you're eating your donut, smoking your cigarette,
exactly.
and
Yeah, and getting all
limping
your
from your
meds from the
lymphedema.
pharmacy. Like, no, that's your time. It's your time. Take it. Use your sick time. And that may be a mental health day where you sit out in the sun. Like one of my best friends, she'd say, you don't use your sick days when you're sick. You use your sick days so you can do something fun for your mental health. So that was her her theory. So she's still in. So she's lasted on that theory.
Well, I can't knock it. I mean, I think if there's any solution long term, it's got to start all the way back into the schools. If we're looking at medicine, right?
Yes.
We've got to get better in the schools. I mean, they've done a little bit. I think doctors are now limited to how many call hours they can do or how many hours they can be on straight. It's still an obnoxious number, but
it is.
But it's better. I mean, that was like a badge of honor. Like, oh, I worked 120 straight hours. I'm like, yeah, I don't want you at hour 80 or after.
Nor do I want my family member to have you at that hour.
Yeah. No. And I've been the one, to say, you sure you want to run Pitocin on the preterm labor patient when they meant to say MAG, and I'm like, you sure about that?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Good catch.
Check this.
I mean, that's what happens. It's not a badge of honor. It's ridiculous.
Right.
We're human beings. We are, we have limits. We break, you know, and we can't do that to ourselves anymore.
I think this generation that's coming through the pipeline now has that part figured out, which gives me a little bit of hope that maybe things will improve.
My friend's daughter went to med school and I applauded her. She'd travel. She went to Brazil, but during med school, and then she took a year off and it wasn't a year off. She actually went to Peru, I think, and did a research project. And, her mom's like, what about med school? I mean, she's like, it's going to be there. I'm going to do this research project and you're going to be a year behind your classmates. So what? And she told her mom, she goes, I watched you. I'm not doing what you did. And she did all through med school. She's now in her internship. She's just starting there, but she traveled. She went and worked at it was in Bosnia or Serbia or one of the places. And she worked at a shelter there. And she traveled to Brazil. She traveled to all these places while she was in med school. And guess what? She's still a doctor.
Right.
Smiling
and doing it better. Doing it better that her friends that jammed and stressed out over it.
Yeah. And, we talked about when we started off, we talked about breaking generational trauma, and maybe ladies like us are breaking that for this next wave of workers coming through and military members coming through by doing things like this, getting the word out. Hopefully we're a small part of that getting better down the road.
Yeah, I agree. Because we think generational trauma and we think families, but it's actually way more than that. Like you pointed out, careers, jobs, life's an algorithm,
Yes.
And it's what we choose, on our way to make that algorithm work or not. Whichever. Because sometimes it don't work.
Sometimes it doesn't work.
And then you shoot people in the ass by mistake. I want to meet your friends. Like
oh, it couldn't be a recorded conversation.
That's why I would never record it. I just want to meet her because I'm just curious. She's like my type of people.
And then buy her a beer.
There you go. It would be a good time. I can guarantee that.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, let's wrap up. What do you got, MZ?
Leslie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us again. I feel like this has been great conversation and I'm with you. I'm hoping that little situations, conversations like these that we're having kind of pave the way for future successes later on down the road, for people to stop wearing that trauma and burnout like a badge of honor and take care of themselves, fill their cups up so that they can stay in the game for the long haul. Thank you so much for doing what you do as a trauma recovery coach too. I'm sure that you're touching the lives of many and improving their lives. And it's like a ripple effect. You take care of one, it's going to take care of somebody else, and it's just going to keep growing and growing. So you're putting positive energy out into the world. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you so, so much for that and for meeting with us. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, do you have anything else, Leslie, before we wrap up?
I don't. Just I think everybody, I'm easy to find. So, don't suffer in silence. There's too many of us for anybody to ever feel alone. So definitely reach out if you're in need or, need directed towards resources.
Yep. Life is abundant, not scarce. So, all right, everybody. We're done. This is Bullets to Bedpans. I am Detox, and I'm here with my co-host,
Medic MZ.
And we're out. Peace out, everybody. Have a great week.